To understand what followed, it is necessary to grasp the nature of New Orleans in 1837. The city was a complicated blend of cultures, economies, and racial classifications more intricate than anywhere else in America. Following the Louisiana Purchase, New Orleans evolved from a French and Spanish colonial outpost into a booming American port where fortunes were built on cotton, sugar, and enslaved human lives. The city developed a three-tier racial system unlike the rigid black-white divide found elsewhere in the South. Between these categories existed free people of color, many of whom were wealthy property owners, and in some cases, slaveholders themselves. It was a city of stark contradictions. Brutal slave markets operated steps away from opera houses. Laws regulated the treatment of enslaved people, while elaborate social gatherings known as quadroon balls arranged relationships between white men and free women of color. Above all, New Orleans was a place where appearance and bloodlines carried immense social and legal weight. The line between freedom and bondage could rest on a single ancestor, a reality that would become central to Ellelanena Reynolds's fate. The winning bid that night came from Charles Delacroix, a wealthy sugar planter whose family had been in Louisiana since the early French colonial era. He paid the unprecedented sum of $7,000, enough to purchase an entire plantation's labor force, for a woman who reportedly had no experience in either domestic service or field work. The transaction was recorded by notary William Patterson, whose ledger noted a curious detail. Delacroix insisted that the bill of sale describe Ellelanena not as a slave, but as a ward to be housed in his Royal Street residence. What happened after Ellelanena was taken to the Delacroix home remains obscured by conflicting accounts. Household staff interviewed decades later recalled that she was treated not as a servant but as a guest, given a private room and clothing suitable for a society woman. Yet she was never seen leaving the property, and visitors were told she was a distant cousin from France who spoke little English. According to household records, Delacroix's wife Isabel departed for her family home in Natchez just 2 weeks after Ellelanena's arrival, taking their 3 children with her, and she did not return for nearly 6 months. During this time, Charles Delacroix closed his Royal Street home to visitors and managed his affairs entirely through written correspondence delivered by his private secretary. The mystery deepened in January 1838 when Dr. Samuel Lawrence was called to the Delacroix home to attend to Ellelanena, who was said to be suffering from a persistent cough. Dr. Lawrence's medical journal, preserved in the archives of Tulane University, recorded that the young woman displayed symptoms consistent with consumption. While her physical constitution seemed sound, what troubled him more was the distress evident in her manner. When alone, she asked whether he knew the truth of her circumstances before arriving in New Orleans. Before he could respond, Delacroix returned, and she said nothing further. Lawrence noted that he prescribed bed rest and tonics, but also observed that her illness seemed rooted as much in spirit as in body. He was never summoned back. By spring, rumors began circulating through New Orleans society about the mysterious beauty confined within the Delacroix mansion. Some claimed she was Delacroix's illegitimate daughter, others that she was a foreign mistress. The most persistent rumor, however, linked her to the Villars family, one of Louisiana's oldest and most secretive lineages. Henri Villars, the family patriarch, had been among the most aggressive bidders at the auction before Delacroix prevailed. The Villars' fortune dated back to the early colonial period, built on vast sugar plantations and, according to legend, privateering during the War of 1812. By 1837, the family had largely withdrawn from public life, rarely appearing in society. What connection could they have to a young woman newly arrived from Havana? That question would remain unanswered for more than a century. The Delacroix Journal, discovered during renovations in 1962, offered the first real insight into Ellelanena's life inside the mansion. Written in a precise, educated hand, the journal began in February 1838 with mundane entries about weather, books, and meals. As the months passed, the tone shifted. She wrote of being allowed access to the family library while forbidden to leave the inner courtyard, told it was for her protection without explanation. She began to fear that promises of processing her papers were merely a fiction meant to keep her compliant. Later entries described a visit from an elderly man named Villars, who studied her features intensely while speaking in French about resemblance and bloodlines, believing she could not understand. When she questioned Delacroix, he grew agitated and reminded her of her precarious legal status. As the months went on, the entries grew more distressed as Elena realized Delacroix had no intention of securing her freedom. By summer, she was planning escape, attempting to contact the American consul to verify her claimed birth in Philadelphia. Her plans were betrayed, and she was sent to Beau Refuge, Delacroix's sugar plantation 50 miles downriver. There her confinement worsened, and her writings described isolation, surveillance, and threats of reclassification as a field worker should she resist. At Beau Refuge, her story intersected with Joseph Miller, a northern abolitionist posing as a physician. His coded correspondence later revealed references to a woman claiming free birth whose imprisonment involved matters of inheritance and identity, threatening powerful interests. Miller promised to investigate but was exposed and fled Louisiana. Elena's later journal entries spoke of overheard conversations about the Villars' inheritance and verification problems, and of fear surrounding the family's name. In February 1839, Henri Villars himself visited her, questioning her about her mother, a gold locket, and her father's death. Days later, Villars was found dead, triggering a bitter inheritance dispute. As the journal continued, Elena recorded Delacroix's growing agitation, his search of her room, and the seizure of her mother's Bible containing her birth certificate. In June 1839, she wrote that she finally understood she was being held not as property, but to prevent her from claiming what might be rightfully hers. She suspected her father was not merely a French merchant, but a Villars, possibly Henri's son. If proof existed, it would explain the desperate efforts to keep her hidden and enslaved rather than recognized as a legitimate heir. The journal's final entry in September 1839 described an escape plan involving a riverboat and the help of a maid. The journal ended there. Records confirm that a woman matching her description was reported missing the next day. Evidence suggests she returned to New Orleans rather than fleeing north immediately, possibly to recover her mother's papers. A receipt linked to Marie Laveau hinted at shelter within clandestine networks. For nearly 3 years, Elena vanished from the record as the Villars' inheritance was settled in favor of Louis Villars. Then, in January 1842, she reappeared dramatically at the Mardi Gras ball at the St. Louis Hotel, not as a slave, but as the elegant companion of Louis Villars himself. Her appearance stunned society and reignited whispers. Charles Delacroix reacted with visible distress, later filing and withdrawing a legal complaint. Weeks later, Elena and Louis departed for France and were never seen in America again. Soon after, the Delacroix family vanished from their Royal Street home. 2 associates were found murdered, and the investigation stalled. The mystery endured for more than a century until the discovery of the hidden room, the journal, the bones, and the portrait. X-ray analysis of the painting revealed an earlier image beneath, identified as Jean-Baptiste Villars, his wife, and their child, strongly supporting Elena's claim. Later discovered letters suggested that Louis Villars had privately settled her claim to avoid scandal, granting her freedom and compensation while silencing the truth. This shadowed agreement may explain both her disappearance and the violent unraveling that followed, leaving behind one of the most haunting, unresolved stories in American history. Even as decades passed, the legend of Elena Reynolds, the Pearl, refused to fade from the streets of New Orleans. Her life, an extraordinary testament to resilience, cunning, and courage, lingered in whispers, in half-glimpsed shadows in the French Quarter, and in the artifacts preserved in the historic collection. The portrait of the Pearl, the hidden family painting beneath it, and the gold locket linking her to her true parentage now serve as silent witnesses to her journey. Each tells a story of captivity transformed into freedom, of property transformed into personhood, and of fear transformed into agency. The Delacroix mansion, once the site of mystery and terror, became a vessel of memory. The hidden room where Elena's journal, the concealed portrait, and the finger bones were found is now preserved as part of the historical restoration. Tour guides recount the story of the woman once sold at auction, her escape, her alliance with Louis Villars, and the disappearance of the Delacroix family. But the full truth of her life and the precise details of the final acts that secured her freedom remain tantalizingly just out of reach. Modern forensic studies, DNA tests, and archival discoveries have shed remarkable light on Elena's later life in Europe. She lived for decades in France and England, raising a family and securing the freedoms denied to her in her youth. Yet traces of her past, the echoes of slavery, the deaths she likely indirectly caused to ensure her liberation, the children saved from potential harm, remind us that freedom often came at a cost no one could quantify. The Delacroix children, whisked away to Cuba, vanished from history. Their fate is unknown, their lives a shadowed complement to Elena's triumph. Meanwhile, the Pearl herself became a symbol, a woman who refused to be defined by circumstance, who reclaimed her identity, and who wrote herself into history when others sought to erase her. Her story illustrates the stark contradictions of antebellum Louisiana, a society obsessed with race, property, and bloodlines, yet powerless in the face of extraordinary human agency. Visitors to New Orleans today can stand before her portrait and see the determination in her amber eyes, the same eyes that witnessed betrayal, confinement, and violence, yet never lost their clarity of purpose. Advanced imaging revealed that she herself likely painted over the portrait of her parents to assert her presence atop a family legacy that had tried to deny her existence. In this act of concealment and reclamation, she preserved both her identity and her claim to history, a palimpsest mirroring her extraordinary life. The Pearl's tale is not just the story of one woman's survival. It is a reflection of the countless unnamed individuals who navigated systems designed to strip them of humanity. For every Elena Reynolds who left a journal, a portrait, or a locket, thousands more vanished into silence, their experiences known only to history's shadows. The city itself, with its gas-lit streets, shadowed alleys, and murmuring river, keeps those memories alive, whispering them to those who walk its paths with open eyes and ears attuned to the past. And so, when you leave the French Quarter, or any space marked by history, consider the invisible legacies beneath your feet. Listen closely, and you might hear them. The whispers of those who survived, of those who resisted, and of those who, like Elena, refused to be merely what the world declared them to be. Her story teaches that identity, agency, and courage can outlast oppression, outwit injustice, and carve a place in history where none seemed possible. In the words inscribed on the back of her portrait when it was donated to the historic New Orleans collection, "Remember her not for her beauty, nor for her suffering, but for her determination to exist on her own terms in a world that offered her no place." In this, she achieved what few of any race or station can claim. she wrote herself into being. Elelonena Reynolds, the Pearl, reminds us that even in the darkest corners of history, the human spirit can rise, resist, and redefine what it means to be free. Her legacy is not only in survival, but in the audacious assertion of life, dignity, and selfhood against a world determined to deny them. Even after her death, Elelonena Reynolds' story continued to ripple through New Orleans and beyond. The artifacts she left behind, the portrait, the journal, and the locket, became more than historical relics. They were symbols of resistance and survival, reminders of a woman who refused to allow her life to be dictated by the whims of the powerful. Scholars, historians, and visitors alike have long been captivated by her intelligence, foresight, and courage. The Delacroix mansion, for its part, retained an aura of enigma. Generations of New Orleanians spoke of it in hushed tones, recounting the sudden disappearances, the whispered rumors, and the unexplained phenomena reported by guests after the building became a hotel. Some claimed to hear faint footsteps echoing in empty hallways, the rustle of fabric as if someone moved unseen, and even a soft, triumphant laugh that seemed to belong to a woman who had finally outwitted her captors. Whether these were echoes of memory, imagination, or something more spectral, the mansion continued to carry the weight of Elelonena's story. In academic circles, her life has been cited as a rare instance where a woman born under the constraints of race and law leveraged intellect, alliances, and circumstance to reclaim her freedom and identity. Her journal entries provide a rare, vivid account of how a person navigated the intersection of legal ambiguity, racial prejudice, and social hierarchy in antebellum Louisiana. They reveal her resilience, her strategic thinking, and her understanding of both human nature and social systems. The letters that surfaced later, some purportedly sent from London and Paris, offered glimpses into her life as a free woman. They hinted at both the peace and the lingering trauma she carried from her past. She spoke cryptically of events in New Orleans, suggesting that while she had escaped, she had not entirely evaded the consequences of the violent world she had left behind. These letters, though fragmentary, enrich our understanding of the lengths to which she had to go to secure not only her liberty, but the safety of others caught in the web of deception and power that had shaped her youth. Elelonena's story is also a lens through which we can examine broader societal dynamics. Her life intersected with slavery, inheritance disputes, racial hierarchies, and gender expectations in ways that illustrate the extreme constraints placed on women, particularly women of color, in the 19th century. Yet her ingenuity and courage show that within these constraints there were spaces for agency and resistance. She exploited gaps in the law, leveraged alliances, and ultimately transformed from a commodity into a self-determining individual, illustrating the power of human resilience. Modern descendants of the Villars family have worked to honor her legacy, establishing scholarships and historical acknowledgments in her name. These acts, while small, represent a recognition of historical wrongs and an attempt to preserve the memory of a woman whose life defied the rigid structures around her. They also highlight how history can be reclaimed, reframed, and used to inspire future generations. The story of Elelonena Reynolds, the Pearl, continues to captivate because it combines elements of history, mystery, and human drama. It speaks to the extreme injustices of slavery, the manipulation of identity and inheritance, and the capacity for courage and strategic thinking in the face of impossible odds. Her life reminds us that freedom is not merely a state of law, but a condition of action, wit, and will. It is a reminder that even within the darkest circumstances, a person can assert their humanity, reclaim agency, and leave a legacy that resonates centuries later. Today, as visitors walk the streets of the French Quarter or explore the historic collections that house her artifacts, they are confronted with the tangible evidence of her story. They see not only the face of extraordinary beauty, but also the legacy of extraordinary courage, cunning, and determination. They are reminded that behind the elegance of a portrait or the inked pages of a journal lies a life that challenged the very foundations of power, property, and social hierarchy. Elelonena Reynolds's life, her flight, her survival, and her reclamation of identity represent a rare convergence of history, mystery, and human tenacity. Her story is a window into the mechanics of a society built on oppression and into the mind of a woman who refused to be a passive participant in her own life. In every sense, she became the author of her destiny, the architect of her liberation, and the enduring symbol of human resilience. The Pearl's Tale reminds us that the past is not simply a series of dates and events, but a living network of choices, courage, and consequences. Her story endures because it speaks to universal truths about freedom, justice, and the human capacity to resist subjugation. Every artifact, every journal entry, and every whispered account contributes to a portrait of a woman who dared to defy the odds, to reclaim what was rightfully hers, and to leave an indelible mark on history. As New Orleans continues to evolve with its bustling streets, historic buildings, and enduring folklore, the legend of Elelonena Reynolds persists. Her life story resonates across generations, inspiring those who study it, who tell it, and who seek to understand the human capacity to endure, to resist, and ultimately to triumph. The Pearl's legacy is not only in her survival, but in the knowledge that even within systems designed to strip a person of power, the human spirit can assert itself, create its own path, and demand recognition. Even decades after Elelonena Reynolds left New Orleans, her story remained woven into the city's collective memory, whispered in the corridors of historic homes and murmured among tour guides recounting tales of intrigue and disappearance. The Pearl had vanished from American soil, yet her influence lingered in the shadows of the French Quarter, where the interplay of wealth, lineage, and social hierarchy had once dictated lives with merciless precision. The Delacroix mansion, abandoned after the events of 1842, became a locus for rumors that transcended mere ghost stories. Residents spoke of lights flickering in empty rooms, of footsteps echoing down hallways devoid of human presence, and of a soft, ethereal laughter that seemed almost triumphant. Some dismissed these accounts as fanciful exaggerations, the natural imaginings of a city steeped in superstition, but others believed that Elelonena's presence, the spirit of a woman who had escaped the cruel machinations of men, remained tethered to the very walls of the house she had once occupied. By the late 19th century, the mansion had changed hands several times, each owner encountering strange phenomena. Visitors reported feeling watched in the hallways, a sensation intensified near the preserved hidden room where the journal, finger bones, and portrait had once been kept. Though the artifacts themselves had been relocated to the historic New Orleans collection for safekeeping, the house retained an aura of secrecy and unresolved tension. Locals began to refer to it as a house of shadows, a repository of the city's darkest, most enduring mysteries. Meanwhile, in Europe, Elelonena Reynolds and Louis Villard quietly constructed a life apart from the oppressive social structures they had escaped. Letters, partially recovered through historical archives and corroborated by family descendants, indicated that they established themselves in London with careful attention to blending into society while preserving their own privacy. The children, raised far from Louisiana, were shielded from the brutal realities of their mother's early life. Elelonena's letters reveal a complex mixture of relief, lingering fear, and enduring vigilance, a recognition that even freedom required strategy, foresight, and careful management of perception. Historians studying the correspondence noted a striking detail. Elelanena's ability to navigate legal and social systems was not merely instinctual. She understood the weight of documents, the leverage of knowledge, and the strategic utility of alliances. Her meticulous observations in the journal, her careful interactions with intermediaries like Joseph Miller, and her ultimate collaboration with Louis Villars demonstrate a mind attuned to both the law and the human psyche. She had been placed in circumstances designed to strip her of agency, yet she wielded the tools available to her with precision. The mystery of the Delacroix children remained an unresolved thread. Records in Havana confirm the arrival of 3 children under the surname Reynolds, accompanied by Martha Bernard, yet after their arrival, their trail disappears. Scholars speculate they were absorbed into local communities or relocated further afield, possibly Europe or South America, to ensure the safety of both the children and the adults responsible for transporting them. Their disappearance illustrates the lengths to which Elena and her allies were willing to go to protect the next generation from the consequences of past injustices. The later discovery of the human remains in 1981 near the former Bow Refuge plantation added a grim dimension to the story. The bodies of a man, a woman, and 2 adult males, all executed by gunshot and weighted down in a scuttled flatboat, offered the first concrete evidence that the Delacroix family had met violent ends. Personal artifacts, an engraved pocket watch, a locket containing portraits of the children, suggested their identities, though deterioration prevented absolute confirmation. The careful concealment of the bodies implied calculated retribution rather than impulsive crime, raising questions about who had orchestrated these acts and to what extent Elena or Louis Villars had sanctioned them. In this context, the 1842 confession of Louis Villars gains profound significance. Hidden for more than a century, it revealed his role in the elimination of Charles and Isabelle Delacroix and the protection of the children via safe passage to Cuba. The letter's detailed instructions, combined with the timing of the murders and disappearances, suggest a deliberate strategy aimed at neutralizing threats to Elena's freedom and securing her inheritance. The moral complexity of these actions is undeniable. While the killings were brutal, the intent was to protect a woman who had been systematically denied justice by the legal and social systems of antebellum Louisiana. Elena's subsequent life in Europe demonstrates a remarkable capacity for adaptation and reinvention. In London, she was recorded as a resident in parish registers, married and raising a family. Despite her relatively quiet life, evidence suggests she continued to grapple with memories of captivity and the necessity of morally ambiguous decisions in the past. Letters hint at recurring nightmares, reflections on justice and retribution, and concerns over the unresolved fates of the Delacroix children. Yet, in spite of these lingering shadows, she built a life marked by relative stability, social respectability, and the freedom denied to her for so long. The portrait, journal, and locket preserved in the historic New Orleans collection now serve as a testament to Elena's extraordinary life. The discovery of the hidden family portrait beneath her own painted image symbolizes not just concealment, but reclamation, a palimpsest of identity asserting her rightful place within the lineage from which she had been barred. Modern forensic analysis confirmed that she had likely painted over her own family's image, creating a narrative of survival, ownership of self, and subtle defiance against the societal structures that had sought to erase her. Elena's story has since become a reference point for understanding the intersections of race, gender, law, and slavery in 19th-century America. Her life exemplifies the extraordinary challenges faced by mixed-race women navigating social hierarchies, inheritance laws, and systems designed to commodify human beings. Her ability to survive, adapt, and ultimately assert her autonomy offers an invaluable lens into the resilience of those marginalized and exploited under systemic oppression. Even today, her legacy resonates. Scholars use her life as a case study in legal history, social mobility, and the psychology of survival. Tour guides recount her story to visitors seeking both historical knowledge and the thrill of ghostly legend. Her portrait continues to draw viewers who find themselves captivated not merely by beauty, but by the depth of character, intelligence, and courage conveyed in her gaze. In her eyes, one sees suffering transformed into resolve, vulnerability into strategic foresight, and captivity into freedom. Despite her relocation to Europe, Elelonena Reynolds' story never fully escaped the grasp of New Orleans. The city itself, a living repository of memory, held traces of her life and struggles in its streets, its architecture, and its social consciousness. Scholars and historians have noted that the impact of her escape and the subsequent events surrounding the Delacroix family resonated far beyond the immediate circle of those directly involved. Her journey became emblematic of resistance against a system that sought to define people strictly by race, property, and lineage. A reminder that freedom, once seized, could never be completely erased. In London, records suggest that Elelonena took careful steps to ensure her family remained protected while maintaining discretion about their origins. Parish records, census data, and personal correspondences show her quietly integrated into the local community while cultivating relationships that allowed her to safeguard the well-being of her children. She lived a life of contrasts, outwardly conventional and socially unremarkable, yet deeply connected to the extraordinary circumstances of her past. Letters preserved by distant relatives hint at an ongoing vigilance, a constant monitoring of potential threats from afar, and a conscious effort to remain hidden from those who had previously sought to control her. The mystery surrounding the Delacroix children continued to perplex historians. Their safe passage to Cuba, arranged under the watchful eye of Martha Bernard, may have protected them from immediate danger, but their subsequent fate remains obscured. The possibility that they were integrated into local communities, given new identities, or sent further abroad reflects both the extraordinary lengths Elelonena and Louis Villars undertook to mitigate risk and the systemic vulnerability of children whose parents had been enmeshed in power, wealth, and moral compromise. Despite centuries of research, the children's ultimate destinies remain one of the most tantalizing unanswered questions in the broader narrative of 19th-century New Orleans society. The legal and social complexities of the period provide context for Elelonena's actions and the subsequent unraveling of events. Louisiana's inheritance laws, influenced by the Napoleonic Code, allowed for complex claims of legitimacy and lineage, particularly in cases where mixed-race children were involved. Elelonena's potential claim to the Villars fortune threatened to overturn centuries of social norms, exposing both the fragility and hypocrisy of racial hierarchies that were enforced so rigidly in life, yet easily manipulated or subverted through strategic action. The secrecy surrounding her documentation, combined with her understanding of social leverage, allowed her to transform what might have been an insurmountable obstacle into a pathway to freedom. For decades, the story of the Delacroix mansion and the hidden room remained a source of fascination for amateur historians, ghost hunters, and local storytellers. The preservation of the hidden chamber, with its remnants of Elelonena's journal, the concealed portrait, and the locket, offered tangible evidence of the events that had transpired. For visitors, these artifacts evoked not just curiosity, but a profound sense of connection to the lived experiences of those who had suffered under the institution of slavery and the extraordinary measures they took to reclaim agency. In the 20th century, new technology allowed historians to revisit old evidence with unprecedented clarity. X-ray imaging of the portrait beneath Ellenanena's painted image revealed the precise techniques she had employed, and forensic analysis confirmed the identity of the subjects in the hidden family portrait. This discovery offered compelling proof that Ellelanena had actively participated in the preservation of her familial legacy, asserting her connection to a lineage that had previously been denied to her. Her artistic intervention can be seen as both an act of concealment and reclamation, a visual assertion of her identity and a tangible record of her agency in a world that sought to suppress it. DNA testing in the early 2000s further confirmed biological links between Ellelanena and remains found in the hidden room, likely belonging to Charles Delacroix. The grim discovery highlighted the violent resolution of the Delacroix family's role in the narrative, while simultaneously confirming Ellenanena's strategic foresight and survival. Her life was shaped by an intricate interplay of intelligence, courage, and resilience, a demonstration of her ability to navigate treacherous social, legal, and racial landscapes with precision. Beyond her immediate historical significance, Ellelanena Reynolds' life offers profound lessons about identity, morality, and justice. Her actions, while controversial and morally complex, reflect the extraordinary lengths required to secure freedom in a society structured to deny it. The decisions made in her favor, whether orchestrating escapes, negotiating settlements, or arranging the safety of children, reveal a careful balance of pragmatism and ethical consideration, challenging contemporary assumptions about right and wrong in the context of systemic oppression. Modern scholarship increasingly positions Ellelanena as a figure of empowerment, an example of strategic resistance within an overwhelmingly hostile social environment. Her story resonates in discussions of race, gender, and law, illustrating how individuals can navigate and sometimes subvert systems of entrenched power. Educational programs, historical tours, and museum exhibits now emphasize her agency, creativity, and intellect, shifting focus from her victimization to her active role in shaping her own destiny. Yet, the Delacroix Mansion and the French Quarter continue to hold the echoes of unresolved questions. Paranormal enthusiasts report sensations and sounds suggestive of Ellenanena's enduring presence, a reminder that history and memory often intertwine in ways that resist full documentation. The mystery of the Delacroix children, the precise mechanics of the violent events of 1842, and the full scope of Ellenanena's influence remain tantalizingly incomplete, inviting both scholars and the public to imagine the lives that intersected with hers in profound, often tragic ways. In many ways, Ellelanena Reynolds embodies the broader contradictions of American history, the coexistence of cruelty and resilience, oppression and ingenuity, invisibility and enduring legacy. Her life story underscores the human capacity to navigate and survive systems designed to erase individuality, to reclaim identity even when faced with formidable social, legal, and physical barriers. Through her journals, letters, and artistic creations, she left a record of not just survival but intentional self-definition, a rare window into the inner life of a woman determined to assert her humanity against impossible odds. Even as Ellelanena Reynolds settled into her life in Europe, the shadows of her past lingered in subtle ways. Her name, though scarcely whispered in polite society, carried weight in certain circles, especially among historians, former associates, and descendants of families connected to the Delacroix and Villars households. In London, Ellelanena maintained a delicate balance between anonymity and influence. She lived in comfortable obscurity, yet her actions had long-reaching consequences that would continue to shape legal, social, and familial dynamics across the Atlantic. Her children grew up insulated from the brutal realities of Louisiana slavery, yet even in their distant, cultivated European environment, the legacy of their mother's courage and ingenuity left a profound mark. Ellelanena was meticulous in her efforts to ensure they understood the importance of lineage, justice, and personal agency without ever revealing the full trauma she had endured. She carefully curated their knowledge of family history, instilling in them a sense of identity rooted in truth, resilience, and moral integrity. These children, raised within a European social framework, would later integrate into English society, marrying into families of standing, yet they carried with them the silent, unspoken legacy of the Pearl, the woman whose life had been a battleground of freedom, inheritance, and survival. Back in New Orleans, the Delacroix mansion became an eerie monument to both absence and secrecy. For decades, the property retained an air of mystery, uninhabited for long periods and occasionally occupied by caretakers who reported strange occurrences. These included unexplained noises, objects found out of place, and fleeting shadows glimpsed in corridors long after sunset. Scholars suggest that these reports reflect the lingering cultural memory of trauma, an imprint of human experience upon physical spaces. The hidden room, with its preserved journal, portrait, and locket, became the epicenter of this cultural memory, a tangible link to the extraordinary sequence of events that had unfolded nearly 2 centuries prior. In academic circles, Elela Nena's journal is studied not merely as a historical document, but as a profound testament to human resilience and intelligence. Her meticulous recording of events provides a rare, first-hand account of the psychological and logistical complexities faced by a woman navigating slavery, social hierarchy, and racial prejudice. Scholars have emphasized her strategic mind, noting how she used limited resources, her understanding of social dynamics, and her intellect to manipulate circumstances in her favor. She was simultaneously prisoner, negotiator, and eventual liberator of herself and others impacted by the Delacroix and Villars machinations. The story of the Delacroix children's escape to Cuba continues to captivate historians and genealogists. Archival research has revealed fragments suggesting the children may have integrated into European or Caribbean communities, but definitive documentation remains elusive. Some researchers argue that their erasure from official records was deliberate, orchestrated by Elela Nena and Louis Villars to protect the heirs from lingering threats and potential retribution. This hypothesis underscores her strategic foresight. In the absence of legal protection or societal recognition, she created a private, effective safeguard for future generations. Elela Nena's artistry, the act of painting over the Villars family portrait, represents a symbolic reclamation of her narrative. By concealing the original family image beneath her own likeness, she established both continuity and self-determination. This act of layered creativity mirrors the broader thematic elements of her life: survival entwined with self-assertion, identity asserted through both subtle and overt acts, and the creation of tangible evidence of existence and claim in a society structured to deny her legitimacy. Modern forensic advancements, including spectral imaging, DNA analysis, and archival recovery, have provided unprecedented clarity regarding her life and actions. These technologies have verified her biological connections to the Villars family, confirmed the authenticity of her journals and letters, and illuminated the violent resolution of the Delacroix family's story. Yet even with these tools, certain questions remain unanswered. The ultimate fate of the Delacroix children, the precise mechanisms through which the murders were executed, and the full extent of Elela Nena's involvement in those final, decisive events. These gaps in knowledge serve as a reminder of the incomplete nature of historical reconstruction, particularly when examining events shadowed by secrecy, violence, and systemic oppression. Elela Nena's story resonates particularly in the context of American slavery and racial hierarchy. Her ability to leverage intelligence, lineage, and circumstance to reclaim freedom underscores the limitations of legal and societal structures designed to enforce racialized oppression. Her life challenges narratives that depict enslaved or formerly enslaved individuals solely as passive victims. Instead, Elela Nena exemplifies agency exercised under extreme constraints, demonstrating that survival, resistance, and strategic action were integral to the lived experience of those navigating the morally complex landscape of antebellum America. The moral ambiguities of Elela Nena's actions, particularly regarding the Delacroix murders, have been the subject of considerable debate. Historians, ethicists, and scholars of law grapple with the ethical dimensions of her choices, whether the deliberate execution of perceived threats can be justified in the context of survival, freedom, and protection of innocence. The deliberate orchestration of lethal force, coupled with meticulous planning to ensure the safety of the Delacroix children, reflects a nuanced moral calculus, one informed by necessity, foresight, and a deep understanding of human behavior. In examining these choices, modern analysis often juxtaposes historical context with contemporary moral frameworks, revealing both the complexity of the situation and the extraordinary resourcefulness required to navigate it successfully. Elela Nena's influence extended beyond her immediate circle. Through her letters, journal, and carefully orchestrated actions, she altered the trajectory of multiple families and their estates, reshaping the social and economic landscape in ways that echoed long after her departure from New Orleans. In essence, her life represents an intersection of personal agency and broader historical forces. A woman whose actions, though often hidden, produced lasting consequences for those around her and for the historical record itself. As the 20th and 21st centuries unfolded, Elela Nena's story began to gain wider recognition. Museum exhibits, academic conferences, and historical publications increasingly highlighted her as a figure of exceptional agency. The Elela Nena Reynolds Scholarship Fund, established in her honor, represents both a symbolic and practical recognition of her enduring impact, linking contemporary educational opportunities to the historical struggles and triumphs of a woman who defied systemic oppression. Her portrait remains a central artifact in the historic New Orleans collection, not merely as an artistic work, but as a symbol of resistance and self-definition. Visitors observe her amber eyes, noting the subtle intensity and depth that suggest both suffering and an indomitable will. The layered image beneath the painting, revealing her concealed familial heritage, continues to astonish art historians and the general public alike. The interplay between concealment and revelation, between personal identity and imposed status, provides a visual metaphor for the broader narrative of Elela Nena's life, a story of ingenuity, resilience, and the unyielding pursuit of autonomy.